presentation, of course. Bill will keep everyone muted except for the speaker. And if you have questions that come up during the presentation, use the chat and send those to us through the chat. And then after the presentation, Rachel will address those questions for you. I'm going to go to Terry Walker now. And Terry, if you will introduce our speaker for the evening.
We are very excited to have Rachel Richter with us. She's the urban wildlife biologist. She grew up in Arlington, Texas, so not so far away from us. She has a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries sciences from Texas A&M University. She also has a master's degree in wildlife ecology from Texas State University. After she finished grad school, Rachel began working for Texas Parks and Wildlife with the Big Game program in Austin. She did that for a few years before getting her current position working for Texas Parks and Wildlife in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Her area of focus now is making communities more wildlife friendly through education and technical guidance. Rachel lives with her husband, 2 daughters who are 2.5 and 9 months old, and 2 dogs. So I expect she's really busy. Anyway, we're so pleased to have you here, Rachel, and you can start when you're ready.
All right, thank you everyone for having me tonight. Let me hide all the little faces. All right. Okay, so thank you everyone again for having me this evening and for tuning in for this presentation. So we're here to talk about one of the things that is maybe not featured as often as it should be when we're talking about wildlife conservation. And that is, what are all of the really selfish reasons that we should care about green spaces and having native plants and animals in our cities? And so that's what we're going to focus on today. And I really made this presentation with conservation organizations like y'all's in mind, because I feel like a lot of times we are preaching to the choir, right? Like we're always talking to the converted. We're always talking to the folks that kind of already agree with our mindset. But as members of a conservation organization like the Native Plant Society, y'all are in the unique position that you have the ability to go out and work with people in your community that are able to influence change in how things are done. And I work with volunteers a lot, and I see this stuff happen all the time, and it's really great. But I think one of the things that's great to have in mind when you're having those conversations with the decision makers in your community is that the things that appeal to us may not work with every audience. So see if it'll change slides for me. Maybe. There we go. Sometimes it seems like there's a delay on that first slide click. So hopefully it won't do that again. But I can show y'all, as people who are members of the Native Plant Society, as people who are actively engaging in wildlife conservation, I can show y'all pictures of monarch butterflies and painted buntings, and I can say, these things are important. And you'll be like, yes, they are. There's not really any explanation necessary for that for y'all. And I can tell you that places like this are important to preserve, and that this is a thing that is worthy of conservation, and that green space in our communities is important just for the sake of green space and just for the sake of having butterflies and birds and things like that. But that those talking points that are kind of focused on intrinsic value may not necessarily resonate with everyone. And so the focus of this presentation is to give some of the, as I said at the beginning, some of the really selfish reasons as to why we should care about having green space in our communities here in Texas. And as you know, or you may not know, Texas is an urban state. we tend to have this mythology of being the Wild West. But in reality, Texas has been a majority urban state since the 1950s. And currently, over 85% of our population in Texas lives in a city. It lives in some sort of urban area. And I use the term urban pretty loosely. So to me, urban means downtown Dallas. It also means Weatherford. It also means Abilene. So I'm including like suburbs and small towns as developed urban areas as well. So I want you to kind of think about, like, when you're looking at this picture, how does it make you feel? There's a reason why a lot of popular desktop backgrounds are nature scenes, right? Like, because they look nice, they're relaxing. How do you feel when you look at this picture compared to how do you feel when you look at this picture? The majority of you are probably thinking that you feel much more relaxed when you're looking at this than when you're looking at this. That's completely devoid of any sort of greenness, any sort of plants, any sort of elements of nature. So that's something that we can kind of feel instinctively, but there's also a lot of research to back this up. And so what we're going to focus on today is access to nature has significant benefits to people. And so we're going to focus on a few different things, mental and physical health, as well as economic benefits. And these are all reasons why it's super critical to have nature in our cities, because it has these real kind of tangible benefits to us. And there's a term for this. And so E.O. Wilson, who is a famous entomologist, coined the term biophilia, which basically is the idea that there is an innate connection between humans and nature. And so this is the idea that there's something inside of our brains that is attracted to other living things. We seek out other living things. We like to feel like we have a connection with the natural world beyond just other people. And a lot of times when I hear, so there's a lot of research that's been done on the human benefits of nature, lots and lots. And whenever I see it in the news or people send me articles, I feel like it's always billed as this like cutting edge new idea that nature is really important, especially right now with the pandemic. There's been a lot of talk about how important it is to have nature in our cities. But this is not a new concept. The link between nature and human well-being has been documented for centuries. And there are writings from the ancient Romans where they talk about how they would go out into the woods to de-stress and relax and escape all of the undesirable things about living in the city. So this is something that has been known for a very long time, and there's tons of research out there about it. Now, like I said, we're going to talk about, we're going to start off talking about how being in nature and experiencing nature influences our mental and physical health. One point I do want to make, though, at the start here, is that all of the problems that I'm going to be talking about, these are real medical conditions, and nature is not a panacea. It's not going to make it immediately go away. If you have depression or ADHD or something like that, you're going to also need to seek medical help. But nature is one thing that can help alleviate the symptoms of these medical conditions. And so we're going to talk about some different conditions and some of the research that backs up the benefits of nature for these conditions. So we're starting off with chronic stress, which is something that a lot of us are probably dealing with right now. And chronic stress is the low level kind of everyday stress that we deal with. So, for example, if you get in a car accident, that's going to be a really intense, stressful moment, right? But it's going to be a kind of short period of intense stress, and then it will die off. Chronic stress is more constant. So it's our like daily operating stress level. And the chronic stress that we feel, the stress that we experience and it doesn't go away, this is the type that tends to do more damage to our health and our bodies. And so it's estimated that 77% of adults in the US regularly experience physical symptoms of stress, and 73% regularly experience psychological symptoms. And 33% of adults report having extreme stress. And this is not something that's getting better even before the wonderful year that has been 2020. There was a study done that showed that 48% of adults report that their stress levels have increased over the previous 5 years of the study. And not only is stress rampant, but we're not particularly good at dealing with our stress. The American Psychological Association reports that unhealthy stress management behaviors are widespread. And so we're not finding good, healthy ways to cope with the stress when we're experiencing it. And having that long-term stress puts us at increased risk of a lot of different complications, a lot of other health issues like heart disease, anxiety, diabetes, chronic pain, weight gain, and anxiety. So this is really kind of stuff that can take a toll on your health long-term. Stress recovery theory is one way that it's thought that nature can help alleviate the symptoms of stress with us. And this is basically thought to be an evolutionary response of our limbic system, which is one of the oldest parts of our brain. And then basically, we're kind of hardwired that when we see a natural setting, so like at the beginning of the presentation, I was showing you all the natural setting versus the city setting, and that probably made you feel a little bit different depending on which photo you were looking at. So there's science to back this up. Looking at natural settings and views of nature, not even necessarily being in it, but just looking at pictures of nature can have positive impacts for our health. And of course, if you're actually outside in nature, these impacts are greater. And so it can do things like reduce muscle tension, lower our pulse rate, and lower our blood pressure as well. And research shows that the impact is greatest with views that have calm water with abundant vegetation, non-threatening wildlife. So if you see a tiger, that's probably not going to like mellow you out. Or if you, or savanna habitats have the greatest benefit. And the thought is that these types of habitat to our brains signal safety and an abundance of food. And that helps that cues our body to start relaxing. Forest bathing is a practice in Japan that began in the 1980s. And this is not showering in the woods. It's a metaphor for that basically refers to taking long, thoughtful, meditative walks through the forest. And this is, going slowly, spending your time out there, immersing yourself in the sights and the sounds and the different textures, and really kind of being present in the woods and noticing what's out there. And it's found that people who practiced forest bathing can experience a 12.4% decrease in cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone, a 1.4% decrease in blood pressure, and a 5.8% decrease in heart rate. And you can just imagine, like, if you're having a problem with any of these medical conditions, these like small decreases can really add up over time for that period of relief that your body is getting. Access to nature and green space also can improve our mood. There was a study that looked at 10,000 residents in the UK, and they looked at how satisfied they were. And they measured the amount of green space that was found around their homes. And they controlled for socioeconomic factors to eliminate just, people who are more wealthy and live in nicer neighborhoods tend to be happier. So they controlled for that type of, they controlled for those socioeconomic factors. And they found that as green space increased within a 2.5 mile radius, overall well-being also increased. Another study looked at how satisfied people were, the level of satisfaction people had. And there's certain life events that might make you more satisfied with your lot in life. And they found that moving to an area with more green space had about 1/3 the effect of getting married and 1/10 the effect of becoming employed when you did not have a job previously. So just moving to an area with more green space can really improve your mood quite a bit. Another study that looked at how your brain functions and also your mood had participants do a 50-minute walk in nature, and they found that it decreased anxiety, rumination, and negative mood. It also found that those individuals that walked in areas where they did not have access to nature actually had a decrease in their positive moods. And they found that people who went in the walks in nature performed better on cognitive tests. And they found that this impact is 5 times greater with individuals that are suffering from depression. So spending time in nature can also help reduce the symptoms of anxiety and depression. Walking in nature decreases the brain activity that is associated with withdrawal, sadness, and depression. And one study found that a 1% increase in green space resulted in a 4% lower rate of treatment for anxiety and mood disorders. And they also found, another study found that higher levels of green space found in a neighborhood was associated with lower depression, anxiety, and stress. And then another study found that people that have little green space near their home had a 25% greater risk of depression and a 30% greater risk of anxiety disorders. So one of the other big health issues that we face is obesity. In America, 65% of adults are currently overweight, and 1 in 3 are actually obese. And this is not just adults, it's getting worse for children too. Childhood obesity has more than tripled in the last 30 years. And obesity is one of those diseases that has a lot of additional medical complications that go along with it. And in a study done in 2008, so this is 12 years old now, so I imagine numbers have gone up. So in 2008 dollars, it was estimated that there were $147 billion in medical costs related to obesity in the United States. Because again, it puts you at risk of complications such as heart disease, stroke, sleep apnea, and even some types of cancer. So obesity is a complicated thing. There's lots of reasons why it can happen. But 2 of the things that tie into obesity are going to be your diet and also how much you exercise. So if you're eating the fried chicken and donut sandwich like 10 times a day, that's probably not going to be very good for your weight. But the other really important component is exercise. And this is where access to green space can really help. So currently 50% of adults in the US don't get the minimum recommended amount of exercise, and 26% of adults are completely inactive during their leisure time. And so there's a lot of reasons why that might happen. They might just, maybe they have kids and they work full time, and by the time they get everything done and they get the kitchen cleaned and it's time to go to sleep and they don't have time to do anything else. Maybe people would just rather sit and watch TV. There's lots of reasons. We're busy. Americans are busy, and we don't necessarily always find the time to take care of ourselves, and we're not as active as we should be. Studies have shown, though, that people living near green space are 3 times more likely to be active and 40% less likely to be obese. And people who exercise outdoors typically do so for longer periods and with greater intensity. So not only are you more likely to get out and get exercise if you live near a beautiful nature trail that you can go and hike, that you can go for a walk after work or something like that, but you're more likely to exercise at a greater level intensity. So you're more likely to push yourself harder, which can go a long way to improving your health. Nature can also help us heal faster. So there was a study done in Texas, actually, where a doctor looked at gallbladder patients and how they were recovering depending on how what the view from their hospital room looked like. And he found that these patients that had more natural views, that could see trees and nature from their window compared to those that were looking at a brick wall, had shorter hospital stays, they recovered faster, and they required less pain medication. And this is thought to be that this kind of goes back to that stress recovery theory that I was talking about towards the beginning, where just having that view, that natural view, that natural scenery helps our body to relax. And those reduced stress levels brought on by the natural views tend to help our bodies heal faster. If we're less stressed, our bodies can heal faster. So this picture I have on the screen here, this is last year my mom had knee replacement surgery, and this was the view from her hospital room. Like, how depressing is that, y'all? Like, this is super, like, there's no way that, like, looking out of that window that you could possibly forget that you're in a hospital. There's, like, nothing really aesthetically pleasing to look at. You could actually, like you can kind of see in this picture, like, you could see into the other patients' rooms, and you could see that, like, even it was even worse at night. If the rooms had their lights on, you could see all that was going on. And, like, it wasn't that big of a deal. My mom was only in the hospital for like 24 hours because she was in and out with her surgery. But, like, could you imagine if you were in the hospital for an extended stay and this was your view? That would not be very energizing. So nature also has significant benefits for elderly patients as well. Access to nature has been shown to reduce negative behaviors by 19% in dementia patients. And gardening improves mobility, dexterity, and increases confidence and improves social skills. And this is especially if folks are gardening, say working on a community garden or something like that, that helps elderly folks to stay connected and feel like they have a sense of purpose. And that can go a long way towards their confidence in reducing some of the diseases that are associated with old age. Wander gardens, this is a term for a kind of fenced in area, a garden near some sort of care facility where patients can go out and they can roam freely without worrying about them getting lost or hurt. And they found that patients that had access to wander gardens had 30% fewer falls. And if they did fall, their fall was less severe, and a 10.5% reduction in medication use. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, nature is also super important for our kids. Many of you are probably familiar with the book Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. If you're not, I recommend it. It's a great book. It focuses basically all the ways that nature is so important to our kids and how we might kind of be failing them at being able to provide that access to them. This book coined the term nature deficit disorder, which is not a diagnosable medical condition, but it's a term for just basically the lack of nature in our kids' lives and how that can actually impact how that can impact them. So access to nature has lots of benefits for kids. It can improve their self-discipline, help them to work on things like delaying gratification, having impulse control. It can also improve their attention capacity and also their cognitive development. There was a study done, this is a study that was done in Chicago that looked at 169 children that lived in identical high-rise buildings. And the only difference between the buildings was one building had a more natural view and the other did not. And they found that the children living in the building that had the more natural view from their apartments, they had higher scores on concentration tests, impulse inhibition, and delayed gratification. Nature has also been found to have significant benefits for children that are suffering from ADHD. Again, it's not going to make it go away, but it can help. There was a study that took children with ADHD on walks in different types of environments, and they found that the kids that got to walk in the park had greater improvements on their attention capacity compared to those that walked in neighborhood or downtown settings. As I mentioned a few slides ago, childhood obesity is also an issue. This is a study that looked at children that were aged 10 to 12, and they looked at how much time they were spending outside. And they found that those kids that spent time, for every hour they spent outside, they had an additional 20 to 27 minutes of physical activity per week. And they went back with that same group of kids in 3 years to do a follow-up, and they found 27 to 41% lower obesity rates in the kids that were spending time outside. There's a couple of different studies here that looked at nature around schools. One study looked at the vegetation cover around 905 different elementary schools in Connecticut. And they found that higher vegetation was linked to higher scores on standardized tests. Another study looked at what the view from the classroom looked like, and views that had classrooms that had views of green space. The students in those classrooms had higher test scores, graduation rates, and more students that were planning to attend college. So shifting gears a little bit, we're going to talk about the physical environment some and the impacts that green space can have on it. So as the Native Plant Society, I'm sure y'all are probably pretty familiar with the fact that plants are important to water bodies. And so having the intact riparian area around a body of water, around a stream or a creek, is something that's really important and can help to keep that water body from becoming impaired. If we have impaired water bodies, that can be really difficult to fix. So problems like erosion and things are not things that go away easily once they've started. Also, if a water body is impaired, if the water quality is bad, you might lose out on the recreation opportunities that that water body has to offer. So for example, if there's too much E. coli, you may not be able to go swimming or fish, or even things like kayaking, depending on how bad the water quality is. And of course, no one wants to be drinking water that is contaminated with something that might be harmful to us. So this is an example of a creek that has some pretty significant erosion issues. This right here, years ago, someone apparently came in and like dumped a bunch of concrete into the creek. You can see that's causing problems. And so this, it's kind of hard to tell from these pictures, but this is that same creek on this side. And these barriers are up because the erosion is so bad that it's actually undercutting the road. And so you can kind of see the metal guardrail here. That's where the road like more or less used to be, and it's starting to fall in. And so this is going to cost the city like millions of dollars to try and fix at this point. And then maintaining intact, healthy native riparian areas is one thing that can help to prevent problems like this from happening. So water quality is, of course, really important. Our native plants have really great deep roots that work to hold soil in place, and they also store water in the soil and slow down water, and they also act as natural filters for our water to filter out contaminants. Air pollution is another big problem, and air pollution can lead to a lot of other health issues like asthma, COPD, airway inflammation, and trees. Excuse me, trees can really help with reducing air pollution. A study done in 2010 found that in the United States, trees removed 17.4 million tons of air pollution. That's a lot of air pollution gone that was just filtered out and absorbed by trees. And it's estimated that that air pollution, the removal of that air pollution resulted in 850 fewer deaths and 670,000 fewer cases of acute respiratory symptoms. The urban heat island effect is another issue that we have in urban areas. So if you have ever experienced a parking lot in August in Texas, you are familiar with the fact that concrete is really good at absorbing heat and holding heat. And so all of that concrete and all of that other impervious cover that we have in our big cities, that cumulatively will store a lot of heat and actually make our cities hotter. So for a city of about 1 million people, it can be 1.8 to 5.4 degrees higher. And this difference is most pronounced at night, where it can be up to 22 degrees warmer in the city than the surrounding rural areas, because all of that concrete, the heat doesn't dissipate as quickly as it would in a more natural area. And this can lead to, this is kind of one of those things that has a domino effect. If it's hotter outside, we're going to use more energy trying to cool ourselves off, which is going to cause more air pollution. It also can lead to more instances of people having heat strokes and things like that. Again, trees and natural areas can really help with this. A study found that a 10% increase in tree canopy cover results in a 2-degree Fahrenheit reduction in temperature. And there are ways that you can kind of design your cities to improve the flow of cooler air with connecting patches of green space throughout. Trees and green space in general are also economically very important to us. So a study done in Portland found that houses with trees on average are worth 7% more, which is about $9,000. And that's the equivalent of adding 129 finished square feet. They also found that tree-lined streets boost the selling price for houses in a 100-foot range. And they found that over the city of Portland, having those tree-lined streets adds $1.35 billion in value to the city, just from having trees on your streets. So here is a satellite image from Google Earth, and I'm gonna describe what it is that you're looking at here. So we have 3 neighborhoods. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. Now, here we have like an ultra super mega huge shopping center that has like Target, Walmart, JCPenney, a movie theater, a whole bunch of restaurants. Like anything you can think of is somewhere in this massive shopping center. Here is a city park that has lots of great nature trails going through it, and has a creek and other stuff. And these 2 neighborhoods have trails that connect to this park. So all other things being equal, assuming that these houses are similar in size and design and cost, which neighborhood would you live in if you had the option? Also, so most of you are probably going to say that you would want to live in one of these 2 neighborhoods. Some of you, you might look over here and say like, oh, there's a few more trees. Maybe this is a more mature neighborhood. Maybe I want this neighborhood over this one. Most of you, if all things are being equal, you're not going to choose one of these houses here that has Walmart in your backyard, right? Now think about how much more would you be willing to pay to live in one of these houses compared to one of these houses. So there's a term for this. This is called the proximate principle, which basically, in a nutshell, means that people are willing to pay a premium of 15 to 30% for homes that are near parks and green space. So if you think about it, this is pretty intuitive. You've probably heard that beachfront or riverfront or lakefront property, tends to be more expensive. This is the same concept. People are also willing to pay more for properties that are adjacent to green space than properties that are not. So bottom line is people would much rather look at nature, like a view like you see here, than they would their neighbor's kitchen or a gas station or something like that. And they're willing to pay more in order to have that. So the impact of this is felt within 500 to 600 feet of the park. And typically the cost of creating and maintaining the park for the city is usually offset by the financial benefits of the existence of the park. It's also been found that parks that focus on natural features tend to have a greater positive impact. So for example, a golf course may or may not be a good thing for you. If you play golf, great. If you don't play golf and you're sick of getting golf balls in your yard, not so great. Or a playground or a soccer field might be really good if you have kids or play soccer, but if you don't, there might be some negative things that come along with that. So parks that focus on natural features tend to be more desirable and have a greater positive impact. So the biggest example of the proximate principle is Central Park. Central Park, before it was Central Park, was actually kind of like junk land in New York City. It wasn't something that was very highly thought upon. But Frederick Law Olmsted was the architect behind Central Park. And he was adamant that the people of New York needed to have green space, access to green space on the island in the city. And after it was put in, prices, the property values around Central Park skyrocketed. There was up to a 700% increase in property value in between 1858 and 1870 after Central Park was installed. And of course, we know today that's some of the most valuable real estate in the world. It's estimated that Central Park brings $656 million in tax revenue and $530 million in tourism revenue to New York City every year. So this is huge. It is an incredibly important economic feature, economic generator for the city of New York. And so if you're thinking, okay, well, that's Central Park, we're not going to have a Central Park. Well, you don't have to be Central Park. Even Central Park was not trying to create Central Park. You know, you can't really anticipate something being as successful as that was. So here's kind of a more small scale example. The Austin greenbelt is a pretty well-known natural area here in Texas. A study done that looked at just 2 neighborhoods that were found along the greenbelt in Austin found that the greenbelt generated an additional $13.64 million in just those 2 neighborhoods in property tax revenue for the city. And then if you're thinking, okay, well, we can't do the Austin greenbelt either because that's still kind of large scale. I've got an even smaller example. So there was a study done in 2001 looking at 14 neighborhood parks in DFW. And these parks were tiny. They were between 0.3 and 7.3 acres in size. And I love this quote here because the parks were described as a standard of park quality well within the range of an even marginally committed developer. So like, even if you're really just kind of phoning it in and doing the bare minimum, you could achieve one of these parks, right? It also says in the study that they were remarkable because of their unremarkableness. So we're not talking about like the flagship parks. We're not talking about like River Legacy or Leela or, Lake Mineral Wells or something like that. We're talking about little tiny pocket parks in these communities. And they looked at these parks and the neighborhoods around them, and they tracked 3,200 residential sales over a 2.5-year period. And they found that homes near these parks had a premium of 22% relative to properties that were a half mile away. So even just doing the bare minimum, just having a little bit of a green space, a little bit of access to green space can have a significant impact on the property value of a home. But it's not all just property values. Nature can also be really important for nature tourism. It's Corpus Christi does a study, and they estimated that they do just shy of $1 billion in business revenue and almost 13,000 jobs because of people visiting Corpus Christi for nature. And they found that 47% of all people visiting Corpus Christi were going there for nature tourism. And that may kind of seem like cheating because they have the beach, but this isn't unique just to Corpus Christi. Here's an example that is focused completely on wildlife. So this is Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, which is one that you're probably familiar with. This is thought to be the largest urban colony of bats in the world. 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats call this bridge home. And people come out from everywhere to come and watch these bats emerge during the summer. And it's free to go to see the bats. It's not free to ride on one of these little boats or to rent a kayak or to get dinner afterwards or stay in a hotel or something like that. And it's estimated that the bats colony at Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin adds $7.9 million every year in economic value. There's also a lot of people out there who are interested in wildlife and watching wildlife. So there's an estimated 46 million birders in the United States, and they spend about $40 billion annually on gear and on trips to go birding and things like that. This is a really significant thing. And there's also a lot of people, there's even more people who are interested in just general wildlife watching than there are just specifically birders. A kind of small scale example of this, the yellow-green vireo, one of the only places that you can see it in the United States is in the lower Rio Grande Valley. And it's estimated that the presence of this one bird species brings in $100,000 in local spending every year in the lower Rio Grande Valley, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. Just this one species is worth $100,000 to that community. On a big scale, the outdoor recreation industry as a whole, so people who want to go camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, whatever. In Texas, that accounts for just over 400,000 jobs, $15.8 billion in wages, $52 billion in consumer spending, and $3.5 billion in state and local tax revenue. And nationwide, the outdoor recreation industry is responsible for 7.6 million jobs, $887 billion in consumer spending, and $124 billion in tax revenue. This is not a small cottage industry, y'all. There is an active constituency of people in our state and in our country and in our communities that want the opportunity to experience nature and are willing to spend money to go out and have that experience. So this is something that's really important. It doesn't have to be nature versus the economy. Nature is essential to our economy. So if you're interested in this stuff, I have just a few resources here that I recommend you taking a look into. The Urban Nature for Human Health and Well-Being and the Outside Our Doors reports. These are PDFs that are relatively short and pretty easy to digest that have, they're kind of like a nice little aggregation of studies and information. Excuse me. The proximate principle is like a 200-page book, and it is not something that's going to keep you up at night. But it's like 200 pages of empirical evidence for how nature impacts property values. So if you want to do kind of a deeper dive, that's a good read there. It's available for free online. And then if you want to know way more about nature and health than you ever thought was like physically possible, go to the Green Cities Good Health website that the University of Washington runs, and there's just an immense amount of information there. So if you really want to learn more, that's a good place to go. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that y'all have. I guess you can't unmute. Let me see if the chat, or has someone been monitoring the chat? I guess we didn't talk about that beforehand.
I do see some questions in our chat window. I'll go ahead and ask you to.
Okay.
In your ADHD study with the children, somebody was wondering if those are really different children or sane children tested after walking in different areas.
It's the same children that, yeah, so I guess I'm assuming the question is, were there two groups of children and one went and walked in a natural area and one went and walked in like a urban area. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked at that study. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say it was 2 different groups of kids.
I think that's what they meant,
Yeah.
was whether it was 2 or 1. Rachel asked that question. You can unmute yourself and clarify that,
Yes,
Rachel, if
yes,
you want
because
to.
you said that some children walked in urban areas and some walked in parks. And so that made me wonder, was it really different children, or were they just children who were tested multiple times?
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering exactly.
Yeah, I think that they were 2 different groups, but I'd have to go back and look at the study to say for sure. But I think it was 2 different groups of children.
Let's see what else I have here. Rachel also made a comment about, I guess she's familiar with some of the senior complexes in San Antonio. She's visiting from San Antonio. And that the memory care patients usually have views of the parking lot, she says, whereas the independent living patients usually get the view of trees and flowers. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it'd be great if everyone could have the same pleasant view. But, of course, everyone has limited resources and stuff. So I don't know how they decide to allocate those every
building always has at least one side that has a view of the parking lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Unfortunately.
I think it really has to do with the fact that memory care is usually decided by someone's relatives. And the people who go to independent living might refuse to pay $6,000 a month for an apartment that faced the parking lot. But when I was my dad's legal guardian, I learned the Alzheimer's Bill of Rights includes access to nature, and it's very difficult to find in memory care units. I wonder if how much that affects people's health. But people just kind of figure they can't complain.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it does. And it's unfortunate that, as you said, people may be put in a situation where they can't afford the nicer view. And it should really be something that everyone has access to.
What about, I didn't notice that you talked very much about animals. Does proximity to animals have any kind of effect on either people's health or on the proximate value of properties? Do you know?
Yes, and I'm gonna forget the number off the top of my head, but I know that there's at least one study done that found that people prefer to live in neighborhoods that have more bird species present, that have greater bird species diversity, and that there is an economic value to that. But I can't remember that number off the top of my head. But if someone's really interested in that, I do have some more information that I could send you. Let me see, I'll put my email in the chat here.
Okay, great.
And anyone who has follow-up questions, I am happy to get in touch with y'all. Oh, wait. I just send that to everyone. Okay.
Does anybody else have questions that they want to put in chat or that they want to ask Rachel?
Well, I'm not seeing anything else come up. So I certainly do want to thank you, Rachel, for making this presentation to us tonight. A lot of interesting facts and figures there. And I think give us perhaps at some time a little more ammunition for lobbying for green spaces and lobbying for native plants in those green spaces. And
Can I ask a question or throw something out?
Yeah.
This is Libby. I was just going through a couple of issues of the Star Telegram, and they're reporting more housing developments, with hundreds and hundreds of houses. And, they're going to clear cut and cram as many in. So Rachel, I wonder in this area whether you see any hope that this message is getting through to the developers, or whether the cities or anybody are pushing back and saying, we've got to stop building, in that way and try to bring more of this. What do you see as far as, do you keep up with the trends? Do you, we're kind of the converted that you're talking to tonight, but what are you hearing from the people that just want to, pave it and make money?
Yeah. So one of the challenging things about being in the DFW Metroplex is kind of what I just said right there. It's the DFW Metroplex, right? Like there's not, my colleagues, they get to say like San Antonio or Houston, and of course there's smaller suburbs and stuff like that, but around those cities as well. But there's hundreds of cities in our area. And so, as Terry mentioned, like I grew up in Arlington, and I still am learning new cities that I'm like, I've never heard of that city in my life. Anyway, that's beside the point. But the point I'm trying to make is there's with all of those different cities comes lots of different governing bodies. And so each city is going to handle things differently. The thing that I am most excited about right now, some of y'all may have heard of this, the city of Fort Worth has announced that they are going to do an open space conservation program, and they're starting it. And they've already purchased one property using this, but they're going to devote millions of dollars towards buying up open space in Fort Worth for conservation. And they're not necessarily going to take all of these and develop them to full-blown parks, but it's really exciting because they're talking about all of the things that we want people to be thinking about. Like they're talking about, this is important for our water quality. This is important for our wildlife. This is important for our health. This is important for our economy. So I'm really, really super excited about that. And one thing too, that I think was really encouraging that they mentioned at the stakeholder meeting for that project, and that I hope that this sort of message gets around to other communities as well. They sent out a survey before starting this project, and they asked residents of Fort Worth if they would be interested in preserving open space for conservation. And 81% of the residents of Fort Worth said yes. So I think that that's really kind of powerful that many people said, yes, we want you to spend our tax dollars on this, and so I think getting that type of message out there, and that's where y'all, as the residents of the residents, the community, when you see your city going out and asking for feedback from the public, saying that they're redoing their parks master plan and they want stakeholder input and stuff like that. That's your opportunity to, go and tell them what you want. And, that's when they're wanting feedback, and y'all as members of the community, they're going to listen. They might not change everything and do everything that you want right away. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but hearing that 81% of the community wants open space conservation is a pretty powerful thing. So I think getting that message out there to communities is really important.
It seems like it would be very useful if you attended planning meetings for your community. You could have some of these facts at hand, and for them, the economic response would be a very valid point.
Yes, and one of the things to keep in mind too with that is if you tell people we want a new park, they might just start thinking ka-ching, ka-ching. This is going to cost me so much money. But that's one of the important things that the proximate principle book goes into pretty great detail as to the different ways that this shakes out. So if you have 100 acres and you turn that into a park versus turning that into houses, that's then going to require additional support and maybe additional schools and infrastructure and all of these things that cities have to come up with in order to support people. A lot of times that's why that park that is ultimately going to have the lower maintenance and bring in more revenue for the city. So yes, if you're going to something like that, I would recommend, looking into this stuff, and you can have some of these tidbits in your back pocket when you want to make your case, because saying like, going up and saying Comanche prairie clover is super important, and this is why we have to preserve this space. That may work with some people, but it may not work with everyone,
It would also be a good argument for why people need to incorporate native plants in their home landscapes. Not only would it be fun for you and easier to maintain and save water and things like that, but it would also attract birds, and it would also bring up your home value.
Yes. And yards that are landscaped with native plants have 29 times more biodiversity than yards that do not have native plants, that have only exotics. So that's a really significant difference. And that's one thing that may seem small, when you're just looking at like 0.1 acre lot. But when you think about so much of our community is made up of quarter acre or less lots. All those little quarter acres add up to a lot.
The fragmentation in nature that is being brought about by, chopping up land to make housing developments and cities and things like that, which makes it very difficult for animals to have corridors to walk, to move to more habitable areas, also for preserving the species. In other words, the horny toads have are more fragmented, so you have to have a certain amount of population difference to preserve the species. So just maintaining native habitat in your landscape can greatly impact the survival of our native wildlife species.
Yes. So habitat connectivity is huge, maintaining corridors so that animals are able to move from point A to point B and maintain that gene flow is super important. And also, native plants, they can certainly benefit vertebrates, like birds can come and eat seeds or nectar and things like that, but they also support bugs. Our native bugs need our native plants in order to survive, and those bugs are the basis of our whole ecosystem. So they're super important to have caterpillars and other things and be able to provide a home for them so that birds and other stuff can come and eat them too.
I've always felt like the monarch butterfly is more of an icon for other species. And so we've become very knowledgeable about milkweed and the necessity for that native plant to support the monarchs, which we adore. But we don't see those little invisible because we're not looking for them insects. They don't flutter by like a butterfly. But the whole relevance of native plants to monarchs is indicative of what's going on down at the home garden stratosphere, if you want to call it that.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, sometimes, yeah, so that's sort of what we call like a flagship species. So monarchs are a good example. Horned lizards are another, you know, even things like white-tailed deer. They, you know, that big kind of charismatic species that gets everyone's attention and says, let's do these things because it helps this one really cool species. Well, it's going to help a lot of other stuff too. And so there are definitely other species out there that are reaping the benefits of all the conservation that's going on for that may be targeted at monarchs, but it's helping lots of other pollinators and other critters as well. And so, you know, that's why, you know, there are some city certifications, city recognition programs like the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Then we also have Texas Parks and Wildlife and Audubon, Texas have just this last year kind of launched the Bird City Texas program. And those are both kind of designed that, you know, we're focusing on this one kind of species or group of species, but look at all the other things it's going to benefit as well.
Well, there certainly are a lot of benefits of having nature around. We appreciate so much that you're willing to share all this with us. It's been giving us a lot of things to think about.
Absolutely. Happy to help. Glad y'all enjoyed it.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, actually, I do have a question because you mentioned the habitats, and I was wondering, I know that Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Habitat Certification Program for backyard habitats or wildscapes has been on hold for years because they didn't have funding to hire the staff to coordinate the program. Has that changed, or what's the status of that?
No, so that hasn't changed. It's going to take a lot of dedicated staff time at this point to kind of revive that. What we're currently looking at is maybe not offering a certification because part of the problem with the certification is like say in 2001, someone did, you know, they spent a lot of time and effort. They designed an awesome wildscape in their backyard. They did great. They got the certification. They got the sign. 2020 comes along, or they sell their house. The new owner comes in. They take some of that stuff out and they replant it with like tulips and geraniums and whatever else. And then they still have that sign. So part of the problem is there's not any way to like follow up on that, you know, because what I've been told anyway is that we're kind of ending up with a lot of signs up that, you know, advertised as wildscapes that were no longer wildscapes. So I think what we're looking at is maybe just kind of updating some of the information and putting that information up and kind of making just that available on the website. But I think it's unlikely that the certification will reappear. But in the meantime, there have been other kind of certification programs that have opened up, like the National Wildlife Federation has a backyard wildlife habitat certification program, and it seems like they do a pretty good job with that. So there is a way to get recognition, but I don't think that Texas Parks and Wildlife, at least not in the immediate future, is going to be starting back up the wildscape certification program, unfortunately.
Is that all the comments? Well, Rachel, we really appreciate it again, and I appreciate it so much, as do all of our members. So thank you so much.
Thank you.